Okay. So, hello everybody. My name is Alicia Yost, and I am the founder of Something to Chew On, a women's ministry. And our goal is to connect, encourage, and grow women in their faith through authentic stories. And so I'm talking to Kirsten Panachyda today, and I'm going to quickly read her bio and then talk a little bit about how we know her, how we're connected through Something to Chew On. So Kirsten is a writer, speaker, Bible teacher, and retired homeschooling mom. She lives in central New York with her husband, Dan. They have two young adult sons who were homeschooled from birth through high school, and they are not a bread making, gardening, matching outfit kind of family. They're a roller coaster riding, travel loving, blue hair dyeing kind of family, a fun kind of family. They love Jesus and each other, but there's still a certain amount of sarcasm and sass. Softened by the experience of parenting a son with mental illness, Kirsten writes and speaks to infuse courage into the soul weary. She's the author of Among Lions, Fighting for Faith, and Finding Rest While Parenting a Child with Mental Illness, and also writes historical fiction. You also have another book called Praying Among Lions, Praying When Your Child Has a Mental Illness. So thank you so much for joining us, Kirsten.
I am really glad to be here. It's so fun to chat with you.
Hey. So I met Kirsten at a writers conference in Hartford several years ago, and then asked her to come and speak at one of our Something to Chew On events, and that was awesome. That was we literally brought someone to Jesus that night, which was I'll never forget that night because it was so special to me. And you were there. And so we're obviously writers, and I love supporting other writers. I know it's such a hard thing to do, and I just love women whose heart is to share their stories and also to just glorify God in that. So I wanted to do everything I could possibly to support you. And I remember just this kind of being not in its infancy, but you were beginning this process of putting it together, and to see it all come together and be so beautiful. Like, I'm so incredibly happy for you, and excited for everything God's gonna do with it. So one of the quotes that you have in your book, it really stood out at me. It's on page 74. It says, "Rest comes when we realize we aren't alone in the fight." And I think that stuck out to me because it's such a, it mirrors our goal at Something to Chew On. This idea that if we sit down and we share our stories with someone's going to be like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one that's dealing with that. Thank God. And even if we don't express that outwardly, there's something soothing about knowing that we aren't the only ones who are struggling with something. But more importantly, you point to this not being alone in the fight, with knowing that Jesus is there, that he's working in it, he's growing us in it, he's restoring us through it. And so I love that. And I think that that's such a perfect fit for Something to Chew On. And so I'm really glad, I'm really glad for that. So I have a personal story, which is why I would have bought the book no matter what, just because I love you. But this is the book. It's called, I don't know if it's backwards, but.
No, it's not.
Okay. So I love the color, or the cover. Very nice. And I bought it. I was going to buy it right out as soon as you put it out, the information, because I was in the midst of dealing with a lot of stuff with my own daughter. She's 19 and she has ADHD and has struggled with it for years and years and years. And her 14 to 17, 14 to 18, those years were just awful. They were really, really awful. And they're still, as it is, it's just a roller coaster. It comes and goes in waves. And this past year with COVID and everything, we dealt a lot with changing medications and all of this, and that can be really difficult and tumultuous. And so we were kind of in the thick of it again this past year. And so I really needed to read something. I needed to know and be reminded that I wasn't alone. So thank you for that. So the book chronicles your story with your son, Nicholas, right? And you begin from you kind of go through the whole journey, not the whole journey, but through a major part of your journey. And in it, you're talking about your own story, but then you're also sharing, little snippets of other parents' stories and information from healthcare professionals, and then also just some pointers on, strategies on how to deal with the situation, like little bits of wisdom. And so you call them these defense strategies, right? And the first one that really resonated with me is the very first one, is surviving the ambush of shock. And I love the way you put that, because that's exactly what it feels like. Like you don't know what's happening, and then all of a sudden you're just hit with it. You say, acknowledge the shock and realize you can't prepare for the shock, for how it feels. For me personally, I felt like it was overwhelming grief.
Yeah.
It felt like when my mom she died suddenly, and it felt the same to me. It felt like such a shock and such grief. Can you relate to that? Like, how did that?
Absolutely. Not every parent has a sudden onset crisis situation with their child. Sometimes they really have an inkling ahead of time from when they're younger. But for us, it really was an ambush. We were just trucking along in our nice little family. We had our ups and downs, we had our parenting things, but we were doing okay, and I will totally admit that I bought the lie that it was because we were doing all the right things, because we did A, B, C, and D, we're going to get E, and that formula just doesn't work. And we discovered that very suddenly when my son was 14. And then the next 3 years, we call them the crisis years. That's what the time that the book covers. But for us, it really was one night my son sat down with us. He was in trouble for something schoolwork related. And, but it became apparent that there was something much deeper going on with him. I really believe that God just sort of opened my eyes to dig deeper that night, that February night. And we asked him if it was something, and he said yes. And we said, is there something you want to tell us? And he said yes. But then he couldn't, he physically couldn't get the words out. He kept trying to speak, and it was like something had him by the throat. And I started guessing. I said, can you nod? If I hit on the thing, can you nod? And so I went through all these things. I went through silly things like, do you hate homeschooling and you want to stop, but you're afraid it'll hurt my feelings? It's like, no, it's not that. To, more serious kinds of questions. Are you taking drugs? Are you, and I finally hit on, are you cutting? Which I don't even know why I asked that. I was so naive and ignorant about the topic of self-harm at that time. I really didn't know very much about it. If you had asked me about it, I would have said, oh, that's something that girls do, and it's sometimes a response to maybe sexual abuse or some kind of trauma. I would never have dreamed that my 14-year-old son, and this is a stereotype that boys don't do it. Yes, they do. That he, with his pretty sheltered kind of suburban typical life, and of course my mind immediately jumped to, well, was he abused? And we explored that quite a lot over the next couple of years, but it wasn't an abuse response. So that was the first night, and it just, I can't even describe it. It was like my world that I thought was, this solid thing just crumbled and crashed. It was, and I didn't even recognize it anymore. I didn't know what our life was anymore. What is our family? What is this thing that's entered into my home? I had no clue that this was, down the line. And it really was a shock. And like the defense strategy said, I had to just sit with it and say, there's no way I had to sort of forgive myself. There's no way I could have known that this was coming. And there's no way I could have prepared myself. I mean, maybe I could have been less ignorant, but in terms of how it felt to my soul, you can't prepare for that beforehand. You don't know until it happens. And that's why, you know, you going back to your earlier point about that you're not alone, you know, that importance of sharing your story, that something to chew on is all about it. What I needed in those first months is I needed to know that someone else had gone through this unimaginable thing and that their soul had survived it.
Right.
That's what I needed. It was, I mean, I wanted to know that Nicholas was going to be okay, which you can't know that. I wanted to know that he would be healed. I wanted to know all these things, but my deepest heart cry was, is my soul going to survive this?
Right.
Can my faith survive this? Can my marriage survive this? Am I going to be, is there any way that I could be okay at the other side of this?
It does feel so like earth shattering, and that's why I say it's different than death, right? But it felt so similar. Like I felt like I was gasping for air. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I felt the same way. I remember calling people who had lost their parents and been like how do you live? Like at what point is this going to feel okay? Like at what point is this not going to hurt so much? And I needed to know that I would get to a place where it would become my new normal. And of course, no one knows
You don't
that. No one
want
knows
that,
when, they don't know, you know, and I was like, it's so unsettling. And it was the same, you know, just feeling of like overwhelming. I need affirmation. I need to know it's going to be okay. And I struggled with, I felt like I should have known. Like I felt like, what did I miss? Why wasn't I digging a little deeper? Why wasn't I started going through a checklist of everything that I had not done right, or, you know, had done
Oh
wrong.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Feeling like a bad mom, and where did I go wrong? I mean, I was like, did I eat the wrong thing when I was pregnant? Like, I mean, I was just like everything. I was trying to uncover any little thing, you know.
Yeah.
To
Well,
blame
like I said, we went down the possible abuse path for a long time, and you know, it was a long time before I stopped looking at every, you know, camp counselor, Sunday school teacher, wondering. And but it wasn't that. And you know, that you talked about the pregnancy thing. Well, I was on bed rest for 4 months with Nicholas, and I took a drug that they don't give anymore. You know, was it that? Did I do that? You know, or was it because I let him cry in his
I
crib? Or
know,
you know,
awful. And
no.
I think that's important for moms to hear, or any parent to hear, like if you're in the midst of it, like it's not your fault. Like there's nothing you can do. We all just do the best we can. We're all loving our children the best we can, and you cannot predict it. That's why it's like you call it the shock, the ambush. Like hopefully it never happens to you, but if it does, it's not something you did.
Yeah.
It's important to like to know that, because it's hard to get over that. So another defense strategy against resentment later on, you know, there's several. I can't cover them all. They're so amazing. But you talk about, I really resonated with the resentment part. You say, feel your feelings and recognize your own trauma. And in the midst of it, when you're going through something really hard, it really does turn your life upside down. I know for you, you know, you talked about having to, you know, sit up with your son like you did when he was a newborn, and not getting the sleep, and not like just everything being upside down. Your husband's work was changed, your family dynamic was changed. Same kind of thing, not the same, but very similar for us. And I did resent it. I felt like, oh, like I just, you know, after a while, it just wears you down. And then I was just overcome with guilt for that feeling.
Yeah.
And this still is one of the hardest parts for me, because there's times that I look at her and I'm like, oh, like I just get frustrated. Like I know it's not her fault, and I know, you know, but it's frustrating. So how did you overcome like that feeling of not leaning into that, you know what I mean? Because it's, I should say, not feeling the guilt for having those
Right.
normal feelings.
I think especially for parents whose kids go through crisis or a chronic mental illness, um, it's this is something I'm constantly preaching. You have to realize that this is something that's happening to you too. We spend so much time caring for the child, and that's appropriate. You know, they have needs. But a, a parent, you know, they have lost the family that they thought they were building. You've lost a lot of your time, your extra time. You've lost your dreams of what you thought your family life was going to be like. You may have had to give up very practical things. You know, people have had to quit their jobs to care for their child, and that's, you know, a financial hardship. Um, and sometimes what you go through, depending on what your child's symptoms are, it's it's literally trauma. For example, you know, I worked with my therapist because I took care of my son. um, I was his comfort person after he had self-harmed. So I saw what he had done to himself, and those are injuries on the body of my child.
Right.
And that's a trauma. That's literally a trauma. That's something that parents develop acute stress disorder, which can turn into PTSD, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder if it's not treated. It's very traumatic to have a loved one attempt suicide, you know, and then having those pictures in your head. That is something, and I would urge parents to recognize that you are going through something too, and you need to acknowledge it. You need to take care of it however it needs to be taken care of. Sometimes that means going to a doctor. Sometimes that means getting a therapist for yourself, and it's just another appointment. I get it. You know, how are you going to fit that in your life? How are you going to pay for that? I get it, but you have a precious soul. You know, we each do, and we need to take care of our souls and our children. Um,
I do
that's what,
feel like that was like a theme that really ran through the book. I felt
yeah,
that kind of like that lifeblood coursing through the book, this idea of self-care. You talk
yeah,
about eating well, about getting exercise, getting fresh air. You talked about journaling and praying and receiving care from others and counseling and all this kind of stuff. Like that is really important. And it feels so, I think, counter sometimes as a mom. Like it feels weird to put the mask on ourselves before reaching for our kids,
right.
especially when
Well,
they're
everything in us wants our child to recover and get well. I mean, how desperate are we to see that in their life? And like I said, it is sometimes appropriate to give them all your attention for a time. I mean, sometimes it is just life or death, and do that, you know, but when you have time to step back, you know, assess yourself. How is my body, you know, feeling? Am I having stress response? Is my hair falling out? Is, you know, if I am I have I had a vegetable this week? You know, just, you know, all these things. Because like I said, it's your child is infinitely valuable, but so is each mom.
right.
You know, to the heart of God, we are each precious, and he wants to give us resources to care for our souls. You know, the verse that the title of the book comes from is from Psalm 57. It says, "My soul is among lions. I must lie down among those who breathe forth fire." And the rest of the psalm is about taking refuge in God. But it's this idea that you are there. You can't escape this. This is your child. This is your circumstance. If you know, if your child has a mental illness, there you are, and you can't walk away from that. And so you are being battered. Your soul is being battered with grief and resentment, like you said, and disappointment, and, you know, shock, all these things. But God is meeting us there in the middle of all that, and he can give us rest and peace there. And we need to grab hold of that. You know, we need to trust him that he will provide that for us right there.
Absolutely. And I think, I learned so much. You talk in your book about, how it affected your marriage. And it's very clear, like, how you guys are figuring out not only who you are, but who you are as a couple within that, and then after that. And I related to that very much because, when you're in the midst of so much stress, it's hard not to, like, come at each other, and feel just all kinds of negative feelings with the person who's supposed to be your partner, because it doesn't always feel like they're your partner in the midst of it.
Right.
But I learned so much about myself. Like, the process was so revealing about my flaws, about my strengths, about just so much of it. And I think one of my favorite parts of the book is in chapter 10, when you have this beautiful conversation with God, and you talk about, there's this part where it says this is the scripture, and then what the Spirit says to you in that, and then your response to that, and then again you're just seeing this conversation. It's a really beautiful, it was really beautiful to see that. And you talk about building a life and working on things within yourself. Can you share some of the ways that you feel like God really changed you and grew you, or revealed things about you, like, through that process?
Yeah. One of the things that this experience with my son and with my husband taught me was that I'm not the roles that I play. That I want to lean in fully to being a mom and to being a wife, and those things, to give love to the people that are in my life. But who I am in Christ transcends those things. It's not apart from those things, but it's over those things. So that's what that idea of building a life. I wanted a life that was solid, no matter what else or who else was affecting my circumstances. So for me, one of the things, for me, was to return to things that I truly loved. I love to study the Bible and teach the Bible. And so I had pushed God away for a season. I didn't have time for that. Not that I would have said that, I was pushing him away, but I just didn't delve into that. And I went back to that, and it was, it was just life-giving. I love to write, and I love to read books. So those are things that I did purposely for myself, to remind myself of who I am and how God designed me, that he made me like that. I'm a lover of words, and he delights in that about me. And that's who I am. And it's because of who he made me to be, who God made me to be. But this idea of just having a life with Jesus that is, it's, like I said, it's not separate, but it's transcendent over this world's life. That's my eternal life. That's what's going to go on forever. And I want to feed that. I want to build into that. And I want everything else to radiate from that. That true abundant life that Christ gives us.
I do see that just throughout the book. I see just your dependence on God. I see him working kind of in places that maybe you didn't even see it in the midst of it. And then obviously afterwards, just, how he talks about, breaking up this soil and creating, having it be fertile and creating something out of it. It's so interesting how even in the midst of all of that trouble and, struggle that we have, like, he's still, like, cultivating, he's still growing, he's still restoring, he's still. And I think at the end, the end of the book is so filled with hope. And it's not a hope of, like, your kid's going to be fine. Like,
Right.
it's this hope of, like, God is going to be there no matter what, and you're going to be fine. Like you will, he will get you through this, and it's okay. It's going to be okay. And, you know, you talk in the end about humility, about learning that humility. And I think there's truth in that for, you know, I really related to that as well, about feeling like, you know, those moments when your kid is feeling suicidal, and or you don't know what's going to happen, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what if I lose her? And the moment where you realize that God is like, you never had any control over that
Right.
anyway. Like, you know what I mean? Like, never, it was never within your control. Why do you think it's in your control now? And so to realize that, to like take a, you know, to step back and to realize he has a bigger story for me and for my child. He has way more control over the situation than I ever would, and that he's working things to, you know, to his benefit through it all, that I can't, there's nothing I could do to change that, make it better or anything. So I definitely related to that humility part. And I think some of the other, I think another parent related to that too. She gave a
Yeah.
story about learning humility, which was really beautiful. And I admire you as a mom. You know, in your, there were several, you know, parts of it when your son would come to you, and you would say, where did you cut? And he would say, yes, I did. And, you know, your strength to say, okay, let's bandage it up, you know, and to have to maintain this composure and this, like, it was such a beautiful thing. And I felt like he's so lucky to have you as his mom, because in that moment I know it had to be overwhelmingly hard, and yet you were like, this is what he needs, and I'm going to do this.
Well,
And
I have to interject and say that was learned. That was, you know, that was not my first natural response at all. And I messed that up at the beginning. But well, I did a lot of reading and talking to counselors to find out what actually is helpful at that moment. And also we made a plan with Nicholas's counselor that he would come to me. So that was sort of a third party mediated strategy for him. Um, and I learned, I called it clinical mode. I would be like, okay, flip the switch, clinical mode.
right,
Um, and it is possible to learn that. I mean, I think that that's important for parents to know that you know, because they might listen to what you just said and be like, oh, I could never be, you know, I
right.
freak out. Yeah, I freak
Because that's
out.
what I'm thinking when I read it.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
yeah, I wouldn't have handled it that way.
yeah. It, it is something you can learn and practice.
Yeah,
And I recommend that you do. And then the second thing is you need to know when you can get away and turn off clinical mode and cry about what you just did.
right,
That's equally important. It's important to be very calm for your child in those situations, to be validating, because they need to know that they're safe with you. They need to know, you know, because you know you need them to be able to come to you. You're the first line of defense in most cases if you're the parent. But you also need to take care of your trauma response, you know, going back to what we said before. And that it comes with practice and experience. So I don't want parents to think, oh, because I'm not naturally like that, you know, that's not how I would be. You can do it.
right. Well, and I think, you know, the book, we were talking just very small snippets of
Right.
little things throughout the book, but it's so filled with just not only your story, but you're just layering that with just such practical advice. Like when, you know, he is hospitalized, you're getting very practical advice about what to bring, how to deal with that, how to plan. And then through every phase, every struggle that you come across. And there were so many things that I was like, oh my gosh, like that happened and I didn't really pay attention. But, you know, things like anticipating that other people aren't going to understand and maybe aren't going to be helpful, guarding your hearts and knowing who you can go to with this, and having prayers, you know, people praying around you and that sort of thing. All the practical little things about how to keep our kids protected and safe, and how to advocate for them, how to, like, there's all these things that you filled this book with so much wisdom, so much great advice for parents who are just in the middle of it. And I love that it's not just practical. It's not just like, these are the clinical things you do, but it's about finding God in it and maintaining our own well-being throughout it and all of that. So yeah, it was absolutely so helpful and so beautiful. And I know that it's very needed right now. And I know that if a parent is reading it, they will find support and they will find wisdom and hope in this book. Absolutely. So thank you so much for writing
Thank
it.
you. Yeah, I really appreciate you letting me tell people about it. And, you know, it's my goal to, you know, hold a hand back along the path to the people who were where I was, because like I said, that's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know that it was survivable.
Right.
And it is with God. It
It is.
absolutely is.
And I think it's so important to remember. Actually, I'm walking with a friend through a difficult time in parenting, and we were talking recently, and I was like, you know, I think it's important to remember that there's victory in the end. Like there's all these bumps in the middle of it, like, but and those are really scary and they're jarring and they're uncomfortable, but it's really important to remember that there is absolute victory in the end because God has his hands all over it, and it's impossible for there not to be victory if he's in control of
And
that.
victory doesn't necessarily mean the outcome that we want.
Yes,
That
so
was
true.
something, I mean, that was probably the biggest thing that the Holy Spirit had to work on with me. That because for me, I thought there's no way that this can work together for good unless God heals him. I mean, that's the only way, I'm sure. And God had to help me let go of that it wasn't necessarily going to be about healing, and it might not even necessarily be about saving my child's life. If the worst things that I could imagine happened, was God still God?
Yeah.
Am I still okay? You know?
Yeah. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I think we all want that, right? Like we want a sense of normal, whatever that is, whatever it looks like. We want, we want, you know, I was saying to my friend, I think it feels like I measured my parenthood or even my worth as a mom against how successful they were, and when they were struggling so much, it felt like I was such a failure as a mom, you know what I mean? And so it was so hurtful, like when I was in the midst of stuff, when you're like, going through chaos, and then you're on Facebook, and then a parent is like, and my kid, this is us, we're just doing such and such, or my kid just graduated from high school, or they just did whatever, and you're just like, oh, like it feels.
There were 3 graduation Sundays at our church where they put up the slides of the kids and where they're going to go to college and all that, where I left crying. I thought my kid's never going to graduate
Right.
high school. My kid might not even survive high school.
Right.
So yeah, it's important not to compare. It's important not to compare and not to take that as your worth. That was a huge struggle for me. And did I waste my life by pouring so much into this child? And the thing that I tried the hardest at, I totally failed. I just, yeah, there's a lot to let go.
Do you think
God
there's another
uncovers
layer?
all that.
Do what?
God uncovers all that.
Oh yeah. This idea of like they're going to be successful because of what I did, and there's
Yeah.
a quote, oh, and I wrote it in something else, and I don't even know where it is, but you say it's like a prayer that you're saying. I believe it's in chapter 10, but you're praying and you say something like God, like, let me recognize that it's you that's doing the work, like that it's like you're the one that's working through this. And I think I wrote it down actually in something that's completely separate in my life right now, but I was like, yes, I need to hear that. That just recognition that it's him that's doing all this work. I can't take any credit for it. And I was reminded that we are God's children, and we are disobedient. We are disobedient, and he can't like, we're still gonna mess it all up. You know, and so I'm like, if God himself can't,
Parent.
can't be a perfect parent and have perfect kids, why would I think that I could ever have a perfect kid and be a perfect parent? It really does come down to just, you know, we do the best we can. We love our kids. We love our kids, and they're all so different. And I felt such hope at the end for Nicholas, and even for my own daughter, because I know it is a lifelong thing. This is going to be something that is forever, but it just feels like this is the new normal. This feels like I've learned so much. I know how to handle this in small snippets.
Yeah.
and I'm not,
Yeah.
and I think from day to day, you know, I love where you're talking about, you're planning on going to Disney, and you're like, we're going to plan this Disney, but we're also going to just know that it could just totally go down the toilet. And I feel that it's like, yeah, I'm going to live day to day and look forward to all this stuff, but also know that maybe none of that's ever going to happen, and that's okay. I'll be all right with that. So, okay. So, thank you so much. I want to encourage you all, if you have ever struggled, even if your child doesn't have mental illness, any kind of just crisis that our kids are going through, this book is helpful for that on so many levels. And so if you're going through it, if you have a friend or a family member who's going through it, I highly recommend that. And Kirsten has a companion book to this. It's called Praying Among Lions, praying when your child has a mental illness. And I did not get that one, but I'm sure.
Kneeling.
Oh, sorry, kneeling among lions. I wrote it down wrong. And yeah, so it's about praying when your child has a mental illness, and I'm sure that's also super, super helpful. And you can find out more information about Kirsten at kirstenp.com. So that's KIRSTENP.com. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Kirsten.
Thank you very much, Alicia.
And I just will be praying for all of you guys, and especially for your book. I pray just such success, and just that God would use it in the most amazing ways. I think I would love for you to just get a confirmation from a reader that says, I just read this, it changed everything, because I know what that feels like. It's just such a good feeling, and I pray that you get that over and over and over again, and that God just blesses you and your family.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.